Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a genuinely fascinating concept from Islamic legal philosophy, known as Maqasid al-Shariah. We're going to look way past those rigid, literal rules and uncover the deeper, underlying intentions behind them. Think of it as a journey from the surface level of what we absolutely must do straight into the profound depths of why we actually do it.
So, why do we follow the rules? Let's kick things off with a pretty relatable story. Imagine a little girl sitting in the back seat of a car, and she's relentlessly asking her dad why he stops at a red traffic light. It's a super simple, everyday scenario, right? But as we're going to see, the chain of questions she asks beautifully unravels this entire concept of exploring the actual purpose behind a rule.
At first, the dad gives your standard surface-level response. He says, well, because the light is red, and red means stop. This right here represents the most basic, literal interpretation of a rule. You see a sign, you obey the sign. And honestly, for a lot of people, and even in many legal frameworks, the understanding of the law stops exactly right there. But of course, the little girl, with that boundless, natural curiosity kids have, just isn't satisfied. She pushes right past that literal rule and asks, but why? She's looking for the actual logic that makes the rule necessary in the first place. Because she instinctively knows that red means stop isn't some fundamental truth of the universe, right? It's just a mechanism for something else.
So the father levels up his answer. He explains that if they cross, they might get a ticket, or worse, they could actually get hurt because crossing a red light is dangerous. Now we're moving from just reading a literal sign to the realm of mutual benefit and harm prevention. Basically, we follow the rule to protect ourselves and to protect others. But she keeps pushing. She asks why they shouldn't hurt others, until the dad finally hits the ultimate foundation. He tells her that we protect others because all people are equal and God is the just. And this is just brilliant because it perfectly illustrates how a simple chain of whys, starting literally from a traffic light, can ultimately lead us to the absolute highest philosophical principles of justice, human equality, and compassion. And this whole anecdote of the levels of why connects directly to our main subject today. Maqasid al-Shariah is exactly this. It's the specific branch of Islamic knowledge dedicated to answering those tough why questions. It's the search for the divine intent, the higher objectives, and the moral purposes behind the literal laws. It's about looking past the red light of the text to find the justice and safety it's actually meant to achieve.
Moving into Section 1, Necessities, Needs, and Luxuries. To really put this purposeful thinking into practice, classical scholars organize these underlying intents into a very specific, structured hierarchy. Let's take a look at exactly how they categorized human priorities. At the absolute rock bottom of this hierarchy are the 5 universal necessities. Classical Islamic jurists argue that the entire purpose of the law is to protect these 5 core things: faith, soul or life, wealth, mind, and offspring. Without these, human life itself is in total jeopardy. For instance, the strict ban on intoxicants, well, that exists to preserve the mind, and the harsh penalties for theft or economic fraud, those exist to preserve wealth and economic stability. These rules aren't just arbitrary, they are literal shields for human flourishing.
Now, notice the truly striking parallel here between these ancient Islamic legal objectives and Abraham Maslow's famous 20th century psychological framework. It's wild. Just as Maslow argued that humans have to secure physiological safety before they can even think about moving up to self-actualization, classical Islamic scholars recognized centuries earlier that laws must first secure basic physical survival and family structure before addressing higher intellectual or societal luxuries. It's just a universally human way of structuring what matters most.
Section 2, The History of Purposeful Law. Let's trace this back a bit, because looking at the intent of the law rather than just obsessing over its literal text, that is definitely not some modern reformist invention. It has literally been there since the very beginning.
We can see this play out in a really famous historical incident involving the companions of the Prophet Muhammad. So the Prophet told a group to head to the tribe of Banu Qurayza and specifically ordered them not to pray their afternoon prayer until they arrived. But they ran out of time on the road, so the group actually split into 2 camps. One camp took a rigid literal reading. He said, pray there, so we wait until we get there, even if the prayer time expires. But the other camp took a purpose-oriented approach. No, his intent was just to make us hurry, so we should pray right now on the road. And the really fascinating conclusion here? When told about this later, the Prophet approved of both interpretations.
Tracing this timeline really proves that this purpose-driven methodology has a rich, centuries-long intellectual tradition. It kicked off with the companions in the 7th century applying that purpose-oriented logic. Then, by the 11th century, brilliant scholars like al-Juwayni and al-Ghazali formalized those levels of necessity we were just talking about. And fast forward to the 14th century, Imam al-Shatibi wrote a groundbreaking work establishing these purposes as the absolute fundamentals of the law. He argued that literal rules can never, ever override these universal human necessities.
All right, on to Section 3, Changing Means Fixed Eds. This right here brings us to the intellectual crux of our explainer. It's absolutely crucial to understand the difference between the eternal goals of the law and the temporary tools we use to achieve them.
So, the big takeaway is that while the ultimate objectives, the ends, remain perfectly fixed, the methods to achieve them, the means, have to evolve alongside human progress and technology. Think about it. Looking for the new moon with the naked eye, that was just a 7th century means to accurately track time. Today, astronomical calculations achieve that exact same fixed end, but way more accurately. Or take 7th century clothing styles. They were a means to achieve modesty. Today, the fixed end of modesty remains, but the garments obviously change. The goals are eternal, but the tools, they are entirely adaptable.
Which brings us to Section 4, Ethics for Modern Renewal. Keeping that powerful distinction in mind, let's shift our focus to how modern scholars are applying this ancient framework to some incredibly relevant, real-world issues today. This is where the theory truly meets the pavement.
Contemporary thinkers are actually taking those traditional categories and translating them into modern, actionable concepts. For example, preservation of wealth isn't just about punishing theft anymore. It's being applied broadly to mean global economic development and fighting systemic poverty. Preservation of honor has evolved into the robust protection of human rights and dignity. And the preservation of religion? Modern scholars understand that as the absolute vital protection of freedom of belief.
By focusing on fundamental scriptural principles like this famous verse, no compulsion in matters of religion, scholars using the Maqasid approach can completely reframe controversial topics. Instead of getting totally bogged down in rigid, highly politicized, or outdated historical interpretations, they just return to the overriding purpose of the text. And that purpose? It champions free will and genuine, uncoerced faith.
The impact of applying this purpose-driven approach today is honestly profound. On a macro level, it expands the focus of the law from just punishing individual infractions to actively building global human welfare. At the same time, it swaps out rigid, sometimes overly harsh literalism for a moral flexibility that naturally adapts to different cultures. Plus, because it operates on these high-level principles, it creates incredible common ground between historically divided Islamic schools of thought. And crucially, it provides a really beautiful, shared ethical basis for interfaith dialogue with the wider world.
I really want to highlight this powerful quote from the 14th century scholar Imam Ibn al-Qayyim because it hits the nail right on the head and perfectly encapsulates the entire thesis of the source material. He declared that any ruling that replaces justice with injustice or mercy with cruelty simply does not belong to the law, period, no matter how someone might try to literally interpret it. The ultimate metric for any rule is simply whether it achieves wisdom and human welfare.
And with that, we've reached the end of our explainer. I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. Take this levels of why thinking, this active search for the ultimate purpose behind the rules, and try applying it to the systems, the corporate policies, and the laws in your own daily life. How much more justice, flexibility, and common sense could we unlock if we always focused on the intent of the rules rather than just the literal text? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me. Keep asking why and keep learning.